Now, of course, we see this in other cases. Family sometimes, has their own opinions on what happened to him, how the Park Service handled the case. And this case was no different. The wife of Mitchell, I think at the time was complaining that the Park Service really didn't do enough to find her husband.
I would say that's not a slight on the Park Service as much as
No,
a
they're
lot
grieving.
of times. Exactly. You have family members that are grieving, panicking, distressed. In their eyes, there's quite literally nothing could be done well enough until, their loved one is found. So that's what's hard when dealing with the context of a family member's comments, opinions, but then you also can't write it off either, because there is a history sometimes where there is, there is malfeasance or
incompetence.
Derelict of duty on trying to on these search and rescue teams.
Yeah, and you got to think too with the National Park Service, the search and rescue operations aren't coordinated from some headquarters in DC. Each national park is kind of its own little world, and they handle their search and rescues. Mesa Verde handles their search and rescue different than Grand Canyon National Park and different than Glacier National Park. I mean, there's definitely standards for running search and rescue operations, but they all kind of still operate independently. So
the terrain's different, the weather's different,
the people are different,
experience is different. Yeah, you almost would have to.
So according to the park, authorities shared case files with the family and kept them informed on the search activity, but Mitchell's wife didn't think the rangers did enough to search for her husband. She said in total, rangers spent 2 days searching for Mitchell before scaling back. And then a news release cited a lack of evidence as to the reason. 1 year after he went missing, she said, "Now that it's been a year, and the more I reflect on it, honestly, I'm just pissed off." Their attitude was, he was there, he was lost, and what are they supposed to do about it? So, I get where she's coming from. When when it's your husband, your child, your wife missing, no expense should be spared. Get an army out there to search. But when you're in the Park Service, they're going to try everything they can to find the person. But if they're not finding any evidence, and like we said, this is a smaller park, I could see the search operation getting scaled back faster than maybe a larger park like Glacier or Yellowstone.
Yeah, if they're covering all the territory, they're covering their grids properly, and they get the majority of the area, and there's no sign of life, no sign of foul play. I mean, the reality is, not in this case, but there are stories of people who purposefully disappear. So how much resources do you spend when you're not finding any signs of anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Park Service actually countered her comments kind of with what you said. They said the park rangers searched for Mitchell for about 3 months, mostly in a scaled-back mode, and continued to keep his disappearance on their radar. Their searches continue to cover a 3 to 5 mile radius around the trail he was last seen on. Mitchell's wife, however, wanted the search to extend out of the small area despite her husband's age. She thought he could put on more miles. So right there, you see the park rangers don't think at his age that he's going to be able to cover a lot, more, than a 5 mile radius. But his wife was kind of pissed that they didn't extend the search out farther. Mm-hmm. So, and, unfortunately, this is kind of a common thing we see in these cases. There's always kind of a disagreement between the family and the Park Service. So it's sad, but it's a kind of a fact of these cases.
Sure.
So now fast forward to 2014, Mitchell's wife returned to the park 3 times, expecting answers, expecting to find her husband, expecting some sort of closure, but each time she returned, nothing changed. She believes her husband went off the trail because of confusing signs in the park. Because she was unable to walk the trail, she fed her interest by the account of a family member who had last seen her husband on the trail. So this is an interesting comment. I've been in several parks where the trails are not marked by signs, but sometimes just marked by stacked rocks. Mm-hmm. And if you aren't paying attention, you can literally walk right off the trail.
Very easily.
Yeah. My first hike in Canyonlands, the entire hike was done on trails with, the big rocks stacked on the bottom and then kind of making a little, cone almost of rocks. and they go every, 50 yards, 100 yards. And several times we walked right off the trail because we weren't paying attention, and you can get lost really easily if you're not, familiar with that kind of trail markings.
Absolutely.
So that is believable. Maybe he wasn't experienced, navigating by that kind of trail marker. So
sure.
I've got a little excerpt from a writer/hiker, Jody Peterin. She wrote this in 2013, and she was actually in the park on the same day, on the same trail when he disappeared. So this is just an excerpt of what she wrote. She wrote, "After an hour of walking, I suddenly heard a weary male voice call, 'I need some help.' I thought of the missing hiker. Perhaps after visiting Spruce Tree House, he attempted this trail and run into trouble. I called out several times, but got no response. I thought about going off trail to look, but figured I'd become a victim number 2 if I tried to scramble down those ledges and cliffs. My cell phone had no signal. I hiked back down the trail as fast as I could, and when I found the chief ranger, I told him what I'd heard. Relief washed over his face as another staffer said, 'We thought we heard a call for help in that area yesterday.' They quickly began planning to bring in dogs and more searchers. I left the ranger station and stood looking at the opposite side of the canyon where I'd heard the call and said a silent prayer. When I got back to my western Colorado home the following day, I checked the news, thinking I'd read that the hiker had been found. Instead, I learned that Mitchell was still missing and now 70 people were looking for him. As I write this, it's been almost 2 weeks since Mitchell vanished, and the search has been scaled down. A group of us still think he's somewhere in the park," said Chief Ranger Jesse Ferris. "We've all heard of planned disappearances, but it doesn't smell that way." So that's kind of an interesting little haunting tidbit about this case, that this writer thought she heard him yelling for help. So who knows? Maybe he was stuck on a cliff and was still alive but injured, and was trying to call for help. But just a little tidbit, after he had disappeared.
It was smart of her to not go look for him. Honestly, I think some people would think differently, but that is 100% what you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to, if anything, the best thing she could have done is maybe left something tied to a tree or at next to the trail to mark the exact location. Yeah. But yeah, you never go off wandering looking for where the trouble occurred without, professionals with you.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you're a professional, you've done a lot of rappelling and you have the gear with you, you could attempt it. But even then, I would say, tie a shirt around a tree and, get back to the park ranger office and let them know. Okay, so fast forward to September 17th, 2020. So just recently, after 7 years, park law enforcement rangers found human remains in the park. Mesa Verde National Park Superintendent Cliff Spencer said an anonymous tip the day before indicated the remains of Dale were in a remote section of the park west of Durango.
And I want to jump in real quick, Mike. Whenever you hear people refer to him Dale or Mitchell, he went by his middle name. And that's where, so when you're seeing quotes from people that say Dale, it's usually people that either knew the family or were friends with him because they refer to him as Dale, but it is the same person. Because that tripped me up a little bit, too, because I was reading, I'm like, Mitchell, who's Dale? Who's this other guy? And it's no, they just refer to him by his middle name.
I know, and I apologize to the listeners. I've been probably switching between Mitchell and Dale from time to time, so I apologize for that. I also say this is kind of interesting. Anonymous tip indicated the remains of Mitchell were in a remote section.
So the anonymous tip named him?
Indicated, the remains of Mitchell were in this remote section, which is odd. How would they know?
That's suspect.
Yeah. So the Park Service went on to say the tip did not provide an exact location, but descriptions in the tip gave search crews a good idea of where it was. So I don't know. That's a red flag to me. I think when we get into our theories, I have a theory maybe around that.
Okay. So, don't spoil it now. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So Spencer said the body was found quite a distance away from where Mitchell was last seen, around 4.2 miles. The area, which took crews about 2 hours to reach, was searched in 2013. So it sounds like a pretty rugged area that, takes a while to get to, and it was previously searched. So it's very strange. In my theories, I'll get to this too.
Okay.
So Montezuma...
I'm starting to formulate some opinions right now that I'm just going to keep to myself.
Okay. So Montezuma County Coroner George Devers said he is 99% sure the remains are that of Mitchell Dale because items found at the scene, a driver's license, credit cards, and a social security card that Mitchell's information was on. So I'd say it's pretty clear-cut evidence
yeah.
that it was Mitchell. Devers said he is going to meet with the forensic anthropologist to examine the remains, looking for any signs of trauma or any clues that can explain the circumstances surrounding his mysterious death. He also said that as of late September, foul play was not suspected, and it did not appear he was attacked by an animal. But because this is so new, I don't think we know the results yet from the coroner's report. It may not come out for a few more months because it's only November right now.
Okay.
So they go on to say, because the remains were just bones, Devers said it was likely impossible to determine the cause of death unless Mitchell had obvious signs of trauma, which he did not. Just from what I saw, I'd say natural causes, but we'll look everything over. So it appears, Joe, that he didn't have any broken bones, which you would think if he fell off a cliff, good possibility you're going to have, several broken bones.
Yeah, that kind of blows that whole thing out of the water.
Yeah. So interesting fact there. They go on to say that at the time of the discovery, it was unclear whether a DNA test was possible. They go on to explain that DNA from a bone sample, or to take DNA from a bone sample, the bone must have retained some moisture. Many of the bones found at the scene were bleached, but it's impossible. But it's possible there is still some moisture in there. If a DNA test is possible, Devers said it would take about a year to get the results back. So,
wow. Just sitting out in the sun in the elements can...
Just baking up at elevation, probably pretty dry. So, that's interesting. I mean, the bones are 7 years old too, theoretically, supposedly. So he goes on to finally say that Dale's remains were found by a hiker in the area that is closed to the public at the bottom of a canyon and is believed that is where he died. So we originally had, it was an anonymous tip, but now the coroner is saying that it was a hiker that was hiking in a closed area of the park. I just have a lot of...
Okay, so that makes it less suspect to me. If it's somebody that wasn't supposed to be somewhere and they're like, crap, I got to do the right thing, I'm going to do it anonymously. I would argue that maybe taking like the $200 fine and just, going to him and be like, hey, I was where I wasn't supposed to be, but I found a body. Maybe you could waive the fee.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting case, and I just have questions I was thinking about. Maybe you were thinking the same things. The first thing that jumps at me right away is, he was found in an area that was previously searched, an extensive 2-week search, 60 to 100 volunteers, dog teams, helicopters, rope teams. The park is relatively small, though rugged. Was it missed, or were his remains put there after the search had happened? Or did he fall there after the search happened? How did Dale get so lost? From everything we read, this is a really quick, easy trail.
Yeah, it's well marked, heavily traveled.
I mean, if he got lost, I could see maybe he's around the trail a bit, but how did he end up 4.2 miles away from the trail, rugged terrain? I mean, it took searchers 2 hours to get to where his remains were. That means it would have taken some effort to get there.
I think that's key. That's key. If it takes them 2 hours to go 4 miles and they know the area. Yeah. And they're probably in shape, or at least in shape enough to do that because they do it regularly. That's no small feat.
Yeah. So that's another puzzling aspect of this case. What caused his death? So like the coroner said, there were no visible signs on the bones that he suffered traumatic trauma. So there was no broken bones, no skull fractures. So what happened to him? How did he get down to the bottom of this canyon without any injury? He obviously had no gear with him to rappel down there. How does that happen?
Yeah.
So
that is it's super gnarly. Mike, no, you tell me your theory first, because I'm kind of just like still organizing my thoughts.
So, I mean, these are maybe theory / what could be a possibility.
Okay.
I think based on the fact that I don't think he was maybe as experienced in the backcountry as maybe just, an outdoorsman, and he had no water with him. I think dehydration could have played a significant factor in his disappearance. Like we said, it was 90, 100 degrees Fahrenheit out. He's at elevation, no water. He's middle-aged. He's not a younger, fit guy. When you start getting dehydrated, you start making poor decisions, your judgment's off. He could have gotten dehydrated. Factor in the trails are marked, not marked with signs, but maybe, rock markers like what I saw in Canyonlands. Maybe he did hike off trail accidentally and just was getting confused and kept hiking the wrong way and, somehow ended up where his remains were found. I think that's one theory. I think foul play might play a factor here. Something happened to him on that.
Why do you think foul play?
I think foul play maybe just because they found him in the bottom of a canyon without any injuries. If they had found his remains down there and he had broken legs and, a skull fracture from the fall, I would think it was clear cut he slipped and fell down the canyon. But the fact that they found his remains really uninjured in an area that had already been searched, that just makes me feel like something happened to him and then his body was dumped there at a later time.
Okay.
I mean, he didn't really have anything on him of value to steal. And they found most of his, wallet and everything with his remains. So did he get into some kind of altercation? Did he? I don't know. I'm just saying that because it makes no sense how his body would have gotten down there uninjured.
No, I'm gonna agree with you on that one, because when they started talking about, and just for backstory, I didn't do the full research on this. I knew a little bit about it, but Mike did most of the research in the episode. So when I heard about the canyons not being able to be searched entirely, I was like, okay, this dude definitely fell down somewhere. Mm-hmm. And obviously from the beginning we knew they found the body. I'm like, but I didn't know where they found it. I was going to assume they were going to find it in some crevasse near where the lady was, and you and I would have this very easy, he fell down, got injured enough where he couldn't yell. Maybe he didn't break anything, but, knocked the wind out of him, got a concussion, something like that might not show up in bone issues. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, they were just unable to find him because he wasn't able to call out for help when they initially searched the area, and then there it is, case closed. That's what I thought going in.
Yeah.
It changed my whole perspective because, like you said, two separate, you have that lady who wrote the article.
Yeah.
That basically confirmed that two separate individuals heard a male voice in the same area calling out for help.
Yep.
That is right off of the trail.
Yeah.
So let's assume that he's lost and or injured at that point.
Right off the trail.
Right off the trail, or close enough where you could hear a voice, which is not very far. I mean, if they're screaming, yeah, but she said it was very faint.
Yep.
So that would assume, again, if there's an injury, maybe not a broken bone, or dehydration, exposure, something, maybe he's in early onset hypothermia, but after a couple days can't really move.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense if they find the body there. What doesn't make sense is if he's in a compromised state, close enough to the trail where you can hear him, but then the body is found many years later, 4.5 miles from the site. And it's not like, in the episodes with High Desert where there's flash floods where things can get moved around. This isn't a place like that. It's temperate climate. It's very rocky. Animals aren't going to carry an entire body, especially that far. So the big unknown in this case is, I feel very confidently that he was still by the trail within the search time window, and for whatever reason they couldn't find him.
Yeah.
How did he get 4 miles away from there?
I know. It's potentially injured. If he was calling for help near the trail, you have to assume something was wrong with him. And but what was wrong with him? Obviously, he didn't have any broken bones. Maybe he hit his head or something, or maybe he just was suffering from dehydration and was confused and was calling out for help. But any scenario that you can think of where he would call for help, how then is he able to hike 4.5 miles in rugged terrain and end up in the bottom of a canyon? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I have a lot of questions around the person who found his remains. I mean,
yeah, I think it's suspect. And at the same time, I try and put both shoes on, and hiking an area of the park where you're not supposed to be and then having to call in a tip. I could argue it's a good person who's doing something a little stupid, but they're good enough that they could have ignored it and been like, I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
So like, you know what? I'm going to call an anonymous tip that I found a body. It's more suspect though, however, that they anonymously reported the name of the individual. Again, now hold on. This is where I'm going to flip-flop quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's suspect that they knew the name. Not suspect if they saw the body and looked at the license, looked at this, like kind of searched it to figure out who it was first.
Maybe they did that.
And that's what I'm saying. But like, to be honest with you, I don't know if I would do that. And not that I
wouldn't
know
touch
a lot
it.
about. Exactly. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. I wouldn't touch it. I might take a picture.
Yep.
A, because I wouldn't want to, and B, because just, this isn't science at all, but watching enough crime television episodes, the first thing they do is don't touch anything at the crime scene.
Yeah, exactly.
If I stumbled upon it, I would have tried to not disturb it as much as possible. That's what you're not supposed to do. So
I probably would have done a quick little search of the area to see if there was anything else nearby.
yeah,
And
but I wouldn't have like dug through the personal belongings.
I would have
at all.
taken a bunch of pictures and then hike right back to the ranger station.
Yeah, 100%. So that's where I can see, and this is again, I think that plays into the unknowns about the story, is every aspect of it has something that can go both ways. This person could be a great person who's just off trail, fine, dumb decision, doing the right thing and reporting it, or they're involved somehow.
Yeah.
And then it's very weird of why they would report it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I still have issues with how fast the search operation started. If he was injured and near the trail, you would think they would have found him. And even the dog teams were picking up scent. So, I mean, was he abducted? I don't know. It's a crazy case. I'm hoping that in the next year or two, whenever the investigation's wrapped up, now that they've found his remains, there's an assumption that the case will be closed and we'll be able to get that Park Service report through the a Freedom of Information Act request. So I think we'll learn more maybe once we read that report. But based on all the facts, Joe, I leaning towards foul play somehow. Even though that I don't know.
I'm with you, but like if we had like the scales of justice.
Yeah.
And you have like foul play and innocent mistake death, and you have like the toggle at the top that's pointing right in the middle.
Yeah.
Foul play is like one notch over to the right. Like that, like that's like, and that's as far as it goes. I think that's ridiculous to say it that way.
Yeah.
But that's just the reality is I think I'm kind of with you that it seems like there might be some foul play at hand, but there's nothing to prove that. This is pure conjecture. And it's because it's just like a gut feeling that says there's something more to the story that we don't know.
Yeah. But
I can't point to the family, the person who reported it, or the Park Service as to why. Yeah. None of it makes sense. Hopefully in the next few years, we'll maybe learn more about this case and maybe even do a follow-up if we were made aware of DNA report back, or
it could turn out to
independent analysis on the bones or something.
I mean, you got to assume they're his remains because all of his stuff was found there, but you really don't know until the DNA results come back. It could be different.
I'm gonna go full Hollywood. What about this? What about? I haven't done this in like a few episodes. I'm gonna spin a story that could be a made for TV movie. What if the anonymous tipster is a murderer?
Yeah.
And was aware of the disappearance or whatever or something.
Mm-hmm.
Managed to I just ruined my whole thing. Never mind. I'm just thinking, here's what I'm thinking. They murdered somebody else and planted that stuff on him, but then they would have to have his stuff to begin with.
Yeah.
So it would turn into like some sort of park serial killer.
I mean,
killed
you
both
could
of
go,
them, and I don't know.
I mean, you could go full, Dexter Hollywood. Maybe there's a traveling serial killer that murders people in different parks.
Oh my gosh, that's that's what this was. You just pinpointed it, Mike. Why I was even thinking that way. I'm watching through Dexter seasons right now because they're coming out with. They just talked about they're releasing more episodes. So I was like, all right, I got to rewatch it. So now I'm like, okay, it's this great story with like all these character plots and twists. It's like, nah, that doesn't really happen in real life.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, I think you can tell I'm just grasping at straws because I really have no opinion.
Yeah, I don't either. I think, normally I would say dehydration, probably number one, dehydration that led to some kind of accident.
Yeah.
But you would assume that accident would have happened close to the trail.
I feel like it's all of it. I feel like he went off trail, then he got lost, then he's exposed to elements, then someone murdered him, and then someone moved the body. Like, I feel like it's all of it. Like, that's like all of that makes sense. And that's what's weird about this case. It seems like such a simple, clear-cut case, but there's so many unanswered questions and so many weird gut checks that make you think differently.
Yeah. So that was all I had, Joe. Do you have anything else to add?